Today we are discussing the realist and liberal perspectives on today's world. According to Perspectives on International Relations, the realist perspective can be described as one seeing the world largely in terms of a struggle for relative power, in which strong actors seek to dominate and weak actors seek to resist. The liberal perspective, in contrast, places a larger emphasis on diplomatic relationships. The perspective focuses on repetitive relationships and negotiations among states and establishing patterns or institutions for resolving international conflicts.
In Chapter 5, the textbook highlights the realist perspective on today's world. Different types of realism include the power transition realist, power balancing realist, and minimal or nationalist realist. Power transition realists believe that American dominance is a safest structure for American security and that dominance can be preserved, while power balancing realists predicted that American dominance would not last. Minimal realists are defined as independent and tend to possess more nationalism. The United States is an example of minimal realist nation.
A square is a rectangle, but a rectangle might not always be a square. This analogy is useful when understanding asymmetric threat in warfare and terrorism under the realist perspective. In this analogy, asymmetric threat in warfare is the square, and terrorism is the rectangle. Asymmetric threat in warfare are defined as the exploitation of technology and psychology to target the peripheral vulnerabilities of a larger foe. Terrorism is defined as the use of violence against innocent civilians to advance political aims. From the realist perspective, terrorism is not a surprise. The balance of power occurs as new alliances are formed and old ones are broken. Power transition realists describe the formation of alliances as suppressing the authority of a state. Power balancing realists find alliances helpful when a threat is imminent. Minimal realists worry that allies might become too dependent on a state's support. An important concept to understand when analyzing the realist perspective is war. Under the realist perspective, war may be because of a necessity or a matter of choice. The realist perspective views diplomacy as meaningless without war, which is a common divide between both the liberal and realist perspectives. Liberals suggest that diplomatic relations should be encouraged among states without war. Due to the advancement of technology, not all war is tangible. In fact, in the late 1900s, cyber warfare emerged. Cyber warfare is defined as the attack against a state using technological means. In 2016, Russia led a cyber warfare attack against the United States, which led to questions about the validity of the presidential election in that year. The cyber warfare attack was said to have no apparent effects on the outcome of the election. However, the Russian-led campaign favored Donald Trump's candidacy over Hillary Clinton's.
In Chapter 6, the textbook highlights the liberal perspectives on today's world. The liberal perspective focuses heavily on international institutions and diplomatic relations, such as through the development of the United Nations. The United Nations was formed on the basis of collective security, which is defined as the collection of security into an international institution for the benefit of multiple states. For example, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait and the First Persian Gulf War violated their sovereignty. Due to Iraq's United Nations membership, the UN collectively placed economic sanctions on the state. The economic sanctions resulted in Iraq forces pulling out of Kuwait, thus a triumph for collective security in the United Nations. On the contrary, the realist perspective would have handled the situation differently.
Aside from encouraging collective security through international institutions, the liberal perspective also encourages the development of institutions at the regional level, too. Regional organizations are formed by states within the same geographic region of the world. Key regional institutions include the African Union, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the European Union, the Latin American Integration Association, and the North American Free Trade Agreement. These are key regional organizations that serve benefit to their current members. Regional institutions serve an important role, and arguably a stronger role, in international discussions than independent states and other organizations.
If the liberal perspective opts to not use the collective security approach, a political actor may use the process of diplomacy. Under the liberal perspective, diplomacy builds a foundation of trust between states. For example, Diplomacy and negotiations were used after the First Persian Gulf War. These discussions led to the development of the Oslo Accords, which led to the removal of Israeli troops from Gaza and areas of the West Bank that the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Israel would recognize each other.
The basis of non-governmental organizations, such as the World Wildlife Fund, is supported by a liberal perspective, as they are founded to be independent from government influence. International law dates back to the mid-1600s. Currently, international law regulates the state conduct and faces a difference of opinion on whether it should be democratic or non-democratic.
In conclusion, the video highlighted points of view on today's world from both the realist and liberal perspectives. The realist perspective is described in terms of a power struggle on the individual, domestic, foreign policy, and systemic levels of analysis. On the contrary, the liberal perspective supports international institutions and diplomatic relations among states. Both the realist and liberal perspectives affect how political actors interpret events and make decisions.